Hey Gurudev, this is a talk I gave on the 16th of March 2025 to the Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia meditators, siddhas, and governors. And we were talking about the days when we worked with Maharishi and how we first started TM and got to work with him and just what it was like to be around such an extraordinary person as Maharishi.
If you know Maharshi's story, he, as a young boy, he met his teacher, Gurudev. He met him, and Gurudev told him, to finish his education. So Maharshi got a bachelor's degree, specializing in physics from Allahabad University. And then he joined Gurudev when he was a young man at his ashram in the foothills of the Himalayas. And when Gurudev died in 1953, Maharshi retired to the Himalayas, and he was planning to spend the rest of his life as a recluse. But after some time, a couple of years, he took a pilgrimage to South India, and there he was asked to give a talk in this library in South India, and people came to this talk, and they were just amazed. The librarian said, this is the first talk we've ever heard from a so-called holy man where the person was like the ideals that he was expounding in his talk. And so everyone else wanted to hear him, and it started a whole series of talk. And it ended up the next 2 years, Maharshi just crisscrossing all through India giving talks. And then in 1957, he formed his first organization. There was such a response to transcendental meditation, the spiritual regeneration movement. And then in 1959, he started to travel around the world. And he came to Canada on his first tour in 1961 in Victoria, British Columbia. And that was where my teacher, Eileen Leroyd, she was a reporter assigned to interview this man. And she started TM and then eventually founded the whole movement in Canada. So then Maharshi started a series of world tours year after year, founding the movement country after country. Here he is in Germany in 1960. And as you can see from this picture, he was so full of life. He was so beautiful. He was so happy. One teacher here in Salt Spring, when she was 15, her father heard him in a small town in British Columbia. He came back and he said to his wife, and his kids, he said, I'm not sure what I understood what the Maharshi was saying, but this is a happy man. I want what he has. And it was just such a joy to be around him. So the movement spread. In 1968, 6 months after I had learned, Maharshi held the largest course that he had ever held. It was in what's called Paradise Tahoe now, big Olympic ski resort on the border of California and Lake Tahoe. There were 700 of us there, mostly young. I'm buried in that picture somewhere, and my teacher. And there's Maharishi, Jerry Jarvis, the head of the US movement at that time. And this was the big turning point in my life, because this was when I finally understood what consciousness meant. And I finally understood what we had, this vague idea from things that I learned, from experiences that I had, that there's one experience. And if you have that one experience, it encompasses everything else. And that is consciousness. Everything comes from consciousness. Everything arises in consciousness. And so Maharshi just explained just so beautifully, so clearly what consciousness was, and also how consciousness arose, which is the subject of his successor, Dr. Tony Nader's book, Consciousness is All There Is. If all there is consciousness, and the way Maharshi explained this was in terms of what's called a 3-in-1 structure. You see that in mathematics, you see that in mysticism, you see that in religion. There's always these triangles. And what do they mean? What they mean is that essentially all there is consciousness, an ocean of consciousness. But consciousness has an attribute, which is that it's conscious. There's no form, no matter, no space, no time, but consciousness is conscious. And the only thing it can be conscious of, if it's consciousness, is consciousness. But by becoming aware of itself, just like if we become aware of ourselves, I am, but I am aware that I am, there's kind of three-in-one structure created. Consciousness conscious of itself. So there's a subject object and a relationship between them. And Maharishi explains so many things, and you just sort of get it after a while. If I just know that one thing, isolate consciousness from all its infinite number of expressions, I've won the game. It's all I have to do. Changes everything. Anything that I achieve, it shouldn't be for the sake of achieving that particularly. It should be for the sake of becoming self-realized. How will it help me become self-realized? Understand my real nature. Many other things Maharishi taught us. The other two that really helped me were body awareness. If you haven't learned how to do body awareness, it's a very simple technique your TM teacher can show you. And that I was very moody, and this was the first time I realized that a mood, as Maharishi explained, is a negative thought woven into a negative sensation in the body, some tightness, some contraction, something. And by letting the attention be on that sensation in the body, it will start to normalize, and the mood in the mind will go away. You don't have to psychoanalyze yourself. So many things we learned there. I think I saw Bill Brunel joining. There were probably other people on this call who were there. Let's see. I have a little trouble scrolling here. Just a sec. The next picture, which I'll get to it, was everyone at this course wanted to become a teacher. So the Paradise Valley was in 1968. In 1970, I went to Rishikesh on the banks of the Ganges in India to a teacher training course, and I became a teacher. That's me in here. There's a little blow up of me up here. And many of you know many people who are in this teacher. There's Dr. Bevan Morris, for example, up there, and so on. And this was just a wonderful course, 3 months of Maharishi on the banks of the Ganges in a scene in an ashram that probably hadn't changed in 10,000 years. There was one telephone that worked about once a week, and that was it. It was beautiful. And we learned, Maharishi taught us so many things, just the real wisdom of life and about Kundalini and all these very, say, deeper aspects of it. I got to give flowers on behalf of Maharishi in the course to the great saint and colleague of Maharishi, Sri Anandamoyama, at her ashram in Dehradun. This is Maharishi in the lecture hall in Rishikesh, explaining some finer points with a diagram. It was very rustic, very, very simple. We lived in these simple rooms. But for me, it was just, it was the air there, the feeling of being in this soil that for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years, all these saints. Rishikesh means Kesh of rishis, city of rishis, and it really is that. And this was a scene on the banks of the Ganges, just down from the ashram. Also could have been 100,000 years ago. That's Maharishi with Devendra, his assistant, and Ramacharya Shankarlal, who was a colleague of his with Gurudev, and these are two brahmacharis assisting Maharishi. And this is the Canadians who were there. We're actually, 4 of us are still on the planet, and we're actually meeting the day after tomorrow in Vancouver. Every year this year we have our 55th anniversary of the Canadians who were at the Rishikesh course. And then 2 years later, I went back and I taught in Victoria, British Columbia for a couple of years. And 2 years later, we went to a big course in Mallorca, Spain. First time I'd been to Europe. And these are the Canadians at that course. And that was a legendary course because there were 2,500 people there at that and the sister courses. And that was when Maharishi started this whole program of sending people to, mostly Americans and Europeans, to every single corner of the world. And then for the next 2 years, as I taught back in Canada, I noticed that the movement was expanding so fast, and there was this whole group of about 200 people, mostly young like me, who were what you could call Maharishi's international staff. And I just really wanted to join his international staff. So in 1974, I went to Europe and I managed to meet Maharishi and he accepted me. So this is a few days afterwards or a few weeks afterwards. And to my complete astonishment, I ended up being his personal secretary. And for the next 3-4 years, with Neil Patterson and Ron Decter and others that Ed mentioned, we just traveled everywhere on the planet with Maharishi, looking after all his needs. And here you can see me here. One of the great joys of being what was called the door boy is you get to carry Maharishi's deerskin. To Maharishi's right is Dr. Devedi, one of the great Ayurvedic doctors. So I'm putting you through these slides because I want to give you an idea of what it was like. We traveled so much. Maharishi was always planning. He was always creating universities, programs, writing books, creating posters, creating courses. Everywhere that he went, like we would be walking like this, someone would be taking dictation for whatever it was that he was worked on. Often when we were in Switzerland and Lake Tahoe and wherever it was warm and there was a lake or the ocean, Maharishi would have us, we would rent a boat. So here we've rented a boat, a big boat, holds about 60 people on Lake Lucerne. That's me up in the corner there. And we bring all the scholars and the artists, and they would say, write a book on Sthapatya Veda architecture. And the artist would be there drawing buildings and all the geometry, and people would be writing the text with Maharishi. He loved groupthink. He just loved brainstorming with everyone. And so here we are in the Park Vitz now, a beautiful, beautiful hotel on Lake Lucerne. And we're just, that's Jerry Jarvis there. And we're just walking down now, that's Maharishi's deerskin I'm carrying, to get on the boat on Lake Lucerne. It was just really a lot of fun. And then after I'd been a secretary for, I guess, about 6 or 7 months, we were invited to go to Nepal by the King of Nepal and the Prime Minister of Nepal to do a huge program there to restore the Vedic tradition to Nepal, where it really started. And so Maharishi, we spent 3 weeks planning. We made videos, we made posters, books, audios, just courses, amazing amount of work, hundreds of people. And then Maharishi wanted to compose songs and make what amounted to really the first, I think, the world's first music video for the King of Nepal. So he just composed 11 songs with all these people. So he said, you know, who has a guitar or a sitar? So here you see Rick Stanley, he had a sitar. That's Rick Archer there, Dr. Susie Dilbeck, Susan Tracy, many other friends you might have known. And he would have somebody, he would hum a few lines, and then he would have someone on the guitar or just strum those. So he would hum da 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 da, and then they would blink 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 blink, and they'd practice and get the tune right, and then he would add the words Rastri Kavach Kavani, which was a salutation to the king. And like that, he composed 11 songs with videos that we took to Nepal. So this was where we were doing that, was in this wonderful hotel in the Swiss Alps in Switzerland. We were kind of nomads then, going from hotel to hotel. And then here we are seeing Maharishi off to Nepal, getting him into the car to go to the Zurich airport. That's me, that's Martin Karklins, that's Lawrence Sheaf, Rig Gelfand, Dr. Michael Weinless, I think that's John Dewey. Beautiful old friends. And here we are, this isn't a very good picture, but we're arriving in Nepal. That's me carrying Maharishi's deerskin. And he was received by the army, and it was a very royal kind of visit. And here we are in Nepal, in Pokhara, overlooking the Himalayas. Here we could see the whole Himalaya range, not Everest, but all the other great mountains, Annapurna and so on. And here, so when we were in Nepal, every day Maharishi came to this park. It's called Ratna Park in downtown Kathmandu. And thousands of people would assemble. We had a whole apparatus to get people to come, which I don't have time to explain, but it was extremely ingenious. And Maharishi would divide them into groups according to their Vedic traditions. Everyone would have their tradition. And we had this system that Tom Factor, who's now Raja Tom Factor, invented. It was based on basically the old rocket radio technology, where there'd be a group of 300 people, maybe 6 groups. This field would be made into 6 groups of 300-400 people. And Maharishi was able to talk to them all. They had this little wireless device, and he had basically a wooden box with 6 switches on, and he could talk to one group, and he would explain what they were doing, go to the next one. Then he would initiate them that way and go back and forth and check their meditation. So in 11 days in this park in Kathmandu, Maharishi personally taught 35,000 people transcendental meditation. It was really awesome. When we came back, we were no longer nomads, and our own facility, which we had bought some years ago, in overlooking Lake Lucerne in Salisbury, Switzerland, was finally ready, and we moved in. And here we lived as our headquarters for the next 10 or 12 years until we moved to Holland. This is used to be, these hotels were built at the turn of the 20th century, maybe even earlier. This was the Hotel Combe, where we lived with Maharishi, and this was the Hotel Sonnenberg. They were connected with a bridge. And part of the renovations, this is the Sonnenberg here, the grander hotel. Over here is the Combe, and there was a road in between, and you see that bridge. It was extremely beautiful living in Switzerland. It was such a joy. What a beautiful country, and what a great place to have a headquarters. So this was the great hall in that Hotel Sonnenberg, where we held all our conferences. Maharishi was always holding conferences, scientific conferences, Vedic pundits, sometimes having both. So the scientists would have some principles of physics, and Maharishi would compare it to some passages from the Vedas or from the Quran or from any of the great different scriptures, the Tao, Christianity, etc., showing that they had all cognized and were teaching these same principles. Here, Jorge Becerro, the National Leader of Colombia, is showing Maharishi some chart. And here, this was when Maharishi inaugurated the world government of the Age of Enlightenment, which you may have heard of. And I'm here with this gentleman presenting this. This is typical of the artwork that Maharishi created with his artists. He had sort of his own art form. It was all golden, very elaborate, very enlightened. So here we're presenting it to him. And now we're in Vittel in France. Maharishi's coming out. People are always giving him flowers. And this is in the Hotel Park Witznau in Witznau. And that world government of the Age of Enlightenment, the way we inaugurated it was we rented, this is the flagship Goddard, the sort of original great ship, ferry boat plying Lake Lucerne. So we rented the whole boat. And up here, we had that big celebration where I was presenting that big world government picture to Maharishi. And you can see it was just floating around in a boat with a valley in Switzerland above you was very, very nice. So we traveled everywhere with Maharishi. In the background there, you see Dr. Neil Patterson. This is Tom Factor. That's me, Hans Bader, Brahmacharya Kishore. Here, we just got off a plane in Hong Kong airport. And as you can see, Maharishi had been working on the plane, writing and planning, and he was still writing and planning, even getting out of the plane and on the bus. Here we had a helicopter in Switzerland to go instead of 3 hours from one mountaintop to the other. When we had courses in Switzerland and France, we might be renting 30 or 40 hotels at the same time, smaller hotels with courses, and Maharishi would hop around. So we got this helicopter, and he would just go from one mountaintop to the other, take 4 minutes instead of 3 hours. And one of the great things Maharishi did was, since really 2,500 years ago, when Shankara, the founder of his tradition, was there, he reorganized this great mass of the Vedic literature, which, as you know, the Vedic literature, well, one small aspect of it, which is the Mahabharata, where the Bhagavad Gita is a small part of, the Mahabharata itself is 10 times as big as the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. So the Vedic literature is vast and it covers everything, and it's very confused. And Maharishi sorted the whole thing out, 40 aspects of the Ved, the three main categories and so on. It was an enormous achievement, and he worked on this his entire life. Just one aspect of the 40 aspects of the Vedas, Stapatya Ved, Vedic architecture. I just wanted to show you this slide. This is the hall in the meeting room in, is this in Holland? I think so, may not be. But anyway, this was Maharishi's vision of reconstructing the whole world, proper architecture in accordance with the natural law. He just had this incredible vision of how beautiful that the world could be. Here's just a few more slides and then we're finished. We're in Bali, Indonesia. We're at a temple now in Bali. Maharishi, we would always travel. There would always be 100 of us. He just, was this sort of family. And that way, we always got such exposure to how he thought and how he dealt with, I would say, thousands of tricky situations and challenges. And it's just so interesting to see. Now, many of you may know Jose Luis Alvarez, now Roger Luis, who has introduced Maharishi to so many heads of state. And here we are in Brasilia, in Brazil, and we're just walking to the presidential palace to meet the president of Brazil. At this time, he was a general. This is Neil Patterson and me in India. We're going to Benares in an Indian taxi, and just, a few other places around the world. Here we are in the Panama Canal. This is Dr. Eberhard Arnold. B.Z. Crichton, many of you may know, England. She was the national leader of Panama at that time. Here we are in India, Brahmachari Satchinand. Brahmachari Satchinand had mentioned the word satsang at the beginning, and Brahmachari Satchinand, at one of the Humboldt courses, I was asking him about diet and how important is diet, because everyone was into these weird diets. And he said, yes, diet is important because, you are what you eat. But you eat some wrong food, 2-3 days go by and it's out of your system. But he said there's a more important kind of food, and that is what you take in through your senses, what you read, the movies you see, just everything that comes in through your ears and your eyes. And that goes into your brain and creates what you are, and it's much more difficult to get out of your system because it's so abstract. But he said the most important kind of food is the company you keep, your friends that you have, and he said, because the funny thing is, he said, if you hang around with low people, he said, you won't bring them up, but they'll bring you down. So you have to be very careful. And he said, and that's where the Sanskrit word satsang came from. He said, satsang, as Ed said, it means the company of the wise. Seek the company of the wise, and enlightened people are few, he said, so you keep the company of other seekers. So you reinforce each other, you inspire each other on the path. This was one of countless missions I was sent on with Maharishi. Here we're in Zaire, which is now Congo in Africa. And this was the leader, the head of state at that time, this notorious dictator, Sesu Setu Mabutu. And this is Dr. Chiguna's son. And we were there to tell him about this program we had to bring agricultural self-sufficiency to all the developing countries of the world. And just a few snippets. This is in South America. This is in South Korea. This is in Rio de Janeiro. This is in Caracas, Venezuela. This is in Brasilia. So, we got to see the world and learn the ancient wisdom. And now I'm just going back to Rishikesh. Many years later, 1981, I spent 3 months there with Maharishi, but there were just 4 Westerners. It was all Indians, and we would go down to the banks of the Ganges at 5 at night when it wasn't so hot anymore. And again, it was like a trip back to the Old Testament. These are some Shankaracharyas. And then finally, as Ed mentioned, Maharishi cultured and gave over the leadership of the movement to Dr. Tony Nader. And he wrote this wonderful book, Consciousness is All There Is, which I had a small part in, and actually wrote the first draft of the glossary for, which if you haven't read it, I just deeply recommend that you do, because he's really brought it into this whole conversation today with science, philosophy, and metaphysics about what is consciousness. I just wanted to show you one little film. We were in this ski resort called Courchevel in France in 1976. We had about 20 hotels in this ski town. We would rent ski resorts in the summer and summer resorts in Europe in the winter, so we could get them for like 2 cents on the dollar because they would be otherwise closed. And Courchevel was this mountain peak, and Maharishi was going off to India with Dr. Keith Wallace and Lawrence Sheath. And so we had to rent this little plane on this hairy little airport that dove off a cliff. So that's Ron Dector, Maharishi, the secretary at the time, and he's bringing Maharishi's deerskin up now. There, Maharishi now is coming. This is just a typical family scene. There's no sound, but you see we're all getting Maharishi into the plane and bringing things, and get an idea of how much fun it was. And he looks up, and Maharishi had this look. It was just so full of energy and love and affection. It was really nice to be in his sunshine, I tell you. More than nice. So that's me. And right now what I'm doing is I'm just giving him, there are always 10 questions. Maharishi, what should we do if so-and-so calls? Should we prepare that? So he's just answering all these little questions. So I know what to do when I get back and, on the telephone. And I'm also feeling bad that I'm not going on this trip. And the plane starts up. Now you got to see this hairy airport. Okay, see where it's going? Basically, if you're not airborne in about 30 seconds, you are heading off a cliff. And there he was gone.